So I don't know about your strategy for learning about the future, but mine tends to involve a lot of science fiction. And if I've learned anything from popular media, it's that our future eating habits will be characterized by either effortless luxury or cannibalism. So you start out, you have this dystopian, pessimistic vision of the future of food where we fight for survival, we eat other humans, and there's elaborate robotic systems for securing and distributing nutrients. Then you also have this more optimistic vision of the future, where here in Back to the Future, you have this thing called a hydrator, where you take a little mini model of a pizza, you put it in, boom, it's a big pizza. It's kind of like those little foam pills that you put in water, it turns into a dinosaur. More delicious because it's pizza. You have Star Trek. They have this thing called a replicator that creates instant food. Jetsons has a similar model of instantaneous food production. I'm not sure if they quite have a competitive advantage over Star Trek yet. I don't know. That remains to be seen. But the idea is that in the future, we might have systems that allow us to eat whatever we want, whenever we want. And it's all easy and fun and great, right? Well, OK, let's go back to the past for a minute, like way back in the past. This is Thomas Robert Malthus. He was a British economist back in 1798, and he wrote a very influential paper on the future of food where he came to the conclusion that we're all kind of screwed. Because Malthus drew this chart called a Malthusian Trap. Basically, his idea was that the population was going to grow at a geometric rate, and food output was going to grow at an arithmetic rate, and therefore, food scarcity was inevitable. This intersection here is called a Malthusian Trap. What happens at this point of crisis here? Well, if you read the chart, the population skyrockets. Malthus did not think the population would skyrocket. This is more what it looks like, right? So the idea was that he also believed that if left unchecked, the population would double every 25 years, which was actually a pretty good estimate at the time. And if he had been right, we would have about 48 billion people right now, which is a lot more than our current 7.5. So we didn't hit that trap on a global scale. Why not? A couple of things. One, the population growth rate decreased thanks to education, affordable family planning services, and also thanks to things like war and disease and famine and things that we're not so thankful for. Also, the agricultural output increased quite a lot thanks to technology and human discovery, and also thanks to clearing huge swaths of land in the Amazon to grow soy and clearing large chunks of land all over the earth, so expanding our agricultural production. This chart looks really scary. Our population is still growing. We should be very concerned. We're on track to hit 9 billion people by 2050. But let's look at this one. So it's not quite as scary as you think, because our growth rate is decreasing, right? And caloric output per unit of land has increased a lot since the 1800s when Malthus was thinking about this stuff. Some people, and by people, I mean Wikipedia, tend to think of agriculture in 3 distinct waves. So the first wave of the agricultural revolution happened in 1900 to 1930 because of increased mechanization. And at this time, each farmer could feed about 26 people. Then in the 60s, the term green revolution was coined, and that sparked new changes in methods of breeding and genetic modification, crop optimization, pest management, until you get to the 90s, where each farmer was producing enough to feed about 155 people per farmer. And it's expected that the next wave is upon us, and it's going to be driven by concepts like precision agriculture, machine learning, ways that we can really increase our output per farmer. And it's estimated that we'll be able to feed about 265 people per farmer. And if we're really being honest with ourselves, this is more what the farmers would look like in the future. I do hope that robots in the future have such a great fashion sense. I think the polka dots are really nice. But if we want to understand food, I think we need to look at some more charts. Yeah? So the United Nations set a goal in 2000 of eliminating extreme poverty by 2030, eliminating it. And you know what? We attained our first Millennium Development Goal target to cut the 1990 poverty rate in half by 2015. We achieved that 5 years early. Yeah, it's incredible. It's awesome. So extreme poverty is going down, and the middle class, the global middle class, is growing like crazy. So you won't be surprised to learn that malnutrition is also decreasing, and on the flip side, obesity is increasing as a health concern. Now, a side note about malnutrition, there's a common misconception here that is about lack of food. It's not just about lack of calories, it's about the lack of diversity of calories. So you can have a lifetime supply of avocados and gummy worms and still be malnourished because you're not getting all the essential nutrients that you need. Simple redistribution is not going to solve the problem. If we took all of the calories that we produced in 2009 and we redistributed them evenly across the entire global population, we'd still fall 974 calories per person per day short of what we need to feed the planet. There was a study that came out a few months ago in Bioscience that said that by 2050, we need to increase food production between 25 to 70% to meet global demand, which is even the low end of 25%. That's still a lot more food that we need to produce. OK, more depressing charts. Agriculture also accounts for a huge portion of our natural resources. Nearly a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions, 37% of the ice-free land, 70% of all fresh water is used by agriculture. It really does use a lot of the resources to grow food for all of us to eat. And then on top of that, climate change is expected to negatively affect crop yields, right? Especially in the hungriest parts of the world, like sub-Saharan Africa. Increased water use is going to be stressed by things like climate change. So then on top of that, per capita meat and milk consumption is going up. And especially in China and India, it's expected to remain high in this part of the world. And these foods, they use more resources to produce than the average plant-based diet. And so there are a lot of organizations that are looking into how our increased demand for meat is going to affect the agricultural supply in some. So, OK, done with the depressing charts all over. Recap. Agriculture uses a huge share of our natural resources. Climate change is real, and it's expected to impact crop yields. The population is growing, but it's not as fast as it was, so that's good. Extreme poverty is going down, which is awesome. Malnutrition is going down, which is awesome. But people are eating more resource-intensive foods, right? People that now have more money want to buy foods that are more expensive, and expensive foods are often expensive because they require more resources to produce. So, OK, who is noticing this stuff, and what are they doing about it? This is a big topic. It's heavy. It's huge. It's controversial. There's no one single solution. And for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus on trends in science and technology. Now, there's a lot to say on culture and social policy, but sadly, I don't have all year. So we're going to take the next little while to nerd out about things like drones and AI and imaginary things from Star Trek. Cool? So I want to start by talking about the future of how we're growing stuff. This is just a small sampling of technologies and ideas in the works. There's a lot going on. It's really cool. Precision agriculture is a term that you're going to hear a lot in the coming years. It refers to site-specific farming, using things like machine learning to optimize where plants are planted, how they're cared for, using automation and robots to take care of plants and reduce the amount of humans that are required to grow food. This is called FarmBot. It is an open source CNC farming machine. Think about it like a combination of automation, the open source DIY maker movement, and polycrop farming. It's kind of like a drag and drop farming machine. So they actually have an interface where you can say, I want to grow beets, carrots, kale, and broccoli. And the machine will go, and it has this this little arm, right, that will pick up these seeds and then go and drop them into the spots in the garden. They'll remember where those seeds were, and then it can go back and change its head and pick up this soil tester device, and then it can test the soil in different parts of the crop. It can make sure that each plant receives the specific care that it needs. And also, because it's an open source project, people are adding to it. You can look it up on GitHub, get all the specs. And people are creating versions of it that work for different environments, work for different crops. It's a really cool kind of community movement to encourage people to grow their own food and understand the process and think about it more. MIT is doing a lot of really cool stuff through their Open Ag initiative. This is a picture of one of their computer vision projects for plant and leaf recognition. Speaking of which, drones are becoming a lot more common in agriculture. So drone crop scouting is when you use aerial imagery and then combine it with machine learning to understand what's going on in the fields and detect issues in fields. They often use a combination of satellite, aerial, and drone imagery for this. Vertical agriculture. This is something that you'll be hearing a lot more about, too. So you could say that the rise of vertical agriculture is in part driven by urban populations that are demanding more local food. It's also driven by things like artificial light becoming more efficient and less expensive, greater availability of renewable energy resources, and especially urban populations that lack space to grow food but want local food. There are a few different flavors of indoor farming. You have hydroponics, where there are these, the roots are in water and receive nutrients that way. There's aeroponics, where the roots are in the air and they're spritzed with nutrients. And then you also have aquaponics, which use fish to cultivate bacteria, which helps to feed the plants. Now, some of the criticisms of these systems is that the setup costs are enormous, right? Creating this entire facility, creating these huge stacks in the artificial light is totally out of the question for most farmers in most parts of the world. Another critique is that even though it requires less water and less land to grow the plants, right now the energy consumption is pretty high, and there are a lot of people who are skeptical about whether or not it will ever be more efficient than just growing plants in the sun. So there are some critiques of that. Pest control and plant health is changing as well. So this is an app called Plantix. There are a number of apps in the wild that are like this. The idea, you snap a picture of a plant that's sick, and then it will help detect what's wrong with it. And the other cool thing about this is it almost becomes a crowdsourced data collection system for figuring out what's going on geographically. So let's say that Sally and Ben are both finding these problems with their plants. Maybe they haven't told me about it yet, but they have snapped pictures of their plants, and it's going into this cloud collection system where now I could be alerted, hey, guess what? Sally and Ben both have these problems in the fields that are near you. There may be an infestation heading your way. So systems like this could help to alert farmers of problems that are coming up and also help them more accurately detect what's going on and share information. So in addition to how we grow, there's also going to be some changes in what we grow. So genetic modification. This is probably one of the most misunderstood and therefore one of the most controversial technologies. There's an entire history behind the science and productization and social backlash. I think with any powerful technology, it can be used for both good and evil. A hammer can be used to hit people, and that's not very fun. And I think a lot of the backlash against genetic engineering has also been around the specific products that are being produced rather than the research behind it. So regardless of how you feel about it, there's a lot of investment going into genetic modification and genetic research these days, both in the food side and in the pharmaceutical side. I want to introduce you to Badger Bluff Fanny Freddy. He has 27,461 daughters. And back in 2009, the USDA looked at more than 50,000 markers on his genome and used DNA to predict that he was the very best dairy bull in the land. So quantitative analysis is now the norm in dairy breeding, and geneticists have actually played a really big role in quadrupling our dairy output per cow since the 40s. So now genomic data lets us create more detailed prediction models. It shortens the cycle of trade improvement. This is a double-edged sword. So this is also the very definition of a monoculture. So while we may be able to get more beef per cow and increase the efficiency of our food production, we're also potentially creating an environment that would facilitate the production of superbugs, right, or super infestations. So genetic diversity can be a really powerful thing for protecting our food systems, too. I want to talk a bit about alternative proteins. So conventional agriculture, food supply chains are now a big issue for the environment. And this is an uncomfortable topic, but we have to talk about how some foods are more efficient to produce than others. And one that a lot of the large global organizations are focusing on is beef production, because it tends to be very inefficient to produce. So beef and other ruminants are among the least efficient sources of high-density protein. That includes things like goats and sheep. And it's for a few different reasons. One reason is because cows are warm-blooded animals, so they use a lot of energy just keeping themselves warm. One of the other reasons is that we don't actually use the whole cow. We only use about 68% of the animal. Fortunately, the bones and the organs are used for other purposes, but there's still a lot that's not being used directly for human food. And then the third reason, this is really cool, actually. Cows have this multi-chambered stomach that hosts this party called enteric fermentation, where they don't actually directly digest the cellulose of the grass that they eat. They have bacteria in their gut that ferments the cellulose and then turns it into microbes that they can then absorb into their bloodstreams. So it's not the most efficient way to eat things. It's really cool, and there's a lot of really interesting science behind it. And it does have the advantage of allowing them to eat things like grass, which humans can't eat, so they're not directly competing with the human food supply chain. But on the other hand, it's fairly inefficient. So there are a lot of different caveats in this. There's no one right or wrong answer. I'm not suggesting that everyone stops eating beef, but I will say that it'll be hard for us to scale up beef production as a primary protein source for 9 billion people. Now, I think this is a salad laughing alone with women. Someone on the internet made this clever point that not all vegetarian diets are more efficient than all meat-based diets. So if you were to eat only lettuce, you would need to eat about 40 heads of lettuce per day to get the number of calories that you need, which is somewhere around 15,000 heads of lettuce per person per year. Very inefficient. So someone said this is silly, right? Because no one's eating lettuce as a high-calorie food. But it goes to show that it all depends on the type of food that you're replacing the less efficient food with. There are a lot of different ways that you can create a diet, and I would say that diversity is one of the more important aspects of it. OK, so we just saw a bunch of charts and a slightly terrifying salad. Let's talk about fish. So aquaculture is something that has had a lot of criticism in recent years. A lot of people equate fish farming with very unsustainable practices, and this is true in a lot of cases, right? I think some of the earlier fish farms caused a lot of damage, right? But it's also true that we can't continue fishing our ocean ecosystems the way that we have been for an extended period of time. We're basically maxed out on a lot of the fish that we can pull from the oceans, and there are a lot of fisheries that are overfished. Fortunately, there are a lot of people working on this problem, and it's becoming more sustainable. More than half of the fish that we eat in the United States are from fish farms, and I think you'll see a lot of investment going into this in future years. Insects. How many of you have eaten insects? Wow. How many of you think it's totally disgusting? Okay, like I see some half hands. Like the people that eat insects are like, yeah, and the people that are like, that's gross. Or I don't know about that. So in 2013, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization published a report basically saying, hey guys, countries around the world, can you all please take this seriously, because we have a lot of people to feed, and insects are potentially a very high density protein that could feed a lot of people for a fraction of the resources. So it's not actually something that's new or weird. It's something that 2 billion people around the world already do, which is a little more than a quarter of the global population. It's just really considered weird in places like the US and Canada and Europe and Australia. So there's a lot of energy right now into trying to figure out how to get humans to accept the idea of eating insects. But even beyond insects, it's potentially a really great source of food for fish farms. Another thing that you'll see a lot of is lab-grown meat. Cultured or in-vitro meat is edible muscle and fat tissue grown from animal stem cells. We're years away from commercial availability. There's some criticism that it's incredibly energetically expensive to produce because meat grown in cultures do not have immune systems, so everything needs to be sterilized, potentially using a lot of antibiotics, that kind of thing. But it's probably something that we will see in the future. This is an in-vitro meat cookbook. It's going to have recipes for things like revived dodo wings that become possible when we can grow meat in labs. And finally, single-cell proteins are going to become a more popular thing. There's already a lot of investment in this space. Things like algae that are being produced both as protein and for biofuels. Fun fact, the food industry is trying to replace blue #1, and a couple of years ago, spirulina became the first naturally produced blue replacement. So there's a lot of really interesting investment there as well. So in addition to how we grow things and what we grow, their very experience of eating is going to change a lot. Nutrigenomics is the study of why some people respond differently to the same foods. 23andMe is named for 23 pairs of chromosomes in the normal human cell, and you can spit into a tube, and it's direct-to-consumer genetic testing. Because everyone has different nutritional needs, so it's really hard to describe a single correct diet. Nuts and seeds can be very healthy, or they can be fatal if you're allergic to them. My own father has this horrible genetic condition where he doesn't like cilantro. And I'm really glad that he hasn't passed that gene on to me, because I think you'll agree cilantro is amazing. But there are a lot of different foods that work or don't work for different populations. For example, lactose intolerance is largely genetic. About 65% of the population is lactose intolerant. It varies a lot depending on where you are in the world as well. Augmented reality in food, what? So this is really interesting. Scientists are experimenting with augmenting color and texture to trick your brain. So these are diet goggles, and what it's doing is it's virtually increasing the size of the donut or the cookie or whatever he's holding, and it's also changing the angle of his fingers so that the brain believes the hoax. And they've tested this. If you increase it by about 10%, then your brain will still believe that it's like within the normal range, but you won't eat quite as much because you're seeing it in that different light. There are a lot of other really interesting tricks and hacks. Like, for example, if you serve a dessert on a white plate versus a black plate, people perceive it as 10% sweeter. If you add red food coloring to it, make it pink or red, you perceive it as 10% sweeter. Food companies have known this forever. They've been exploiting it for a very long time. But I think we'll see a lot more interest in how to make people perceive things as delicious. So you all know what this is. It's delicious. It's amazing. The science behind this chip is astounding. You don't even want to know the number of R&D dollars that have gone into engineering a thing that is so delicious and so addictive and still entirely legal. Frito-Lay has this $40,000 machine that simulates a human mouth chewing, and they've been able to figure out that humans prefer a chip that snaps with about 4 pounds of pressure per square inch, right? This is the kind of science that's going into creating foods that we like. But the question is, will we be able to take this science and apply it to things that are maybe healthier for our bodies, healthier for the human environment? This is the Impossible Burger. About 6 years ago, a bunch of researchers said, hey, why don't we break down lipids, amino acids, and all of the components that go into making a burger delicious and see if we can recreate that experience with a plant-based burger. So they came out with this. Then you have the opposite approach. Soylent is, the founders like to talk about the difference between food for sustenance versus food for recreation. So, so some people might not want to have everything engineered in a perfectly flavorful way that makes it addictive. This is, another alternative. And now you're probably thinking, okay, she's just been talking about chips and burgers and donuts and this weird engineered beverage. Then maybe it came from humans. I don't know. Hopefully, healthy things will be part of this conversation as well. And do we need to engineer lentils so they taste like Doritos? I don't know. This is a good question. In case salad laughing alone with women or women laughing alone with salad is not creepy enough for you, I present to you a clown laughing alone with sugar. Sugar may be taxed in the same way that tobacco is taxed in the future. We've already seen some places starting to tax it. Actually, it's a big legal battle in Philadelphia right now, I think Philadelphia, where they passed a sugar tax and the soda companies are fighting it. So that we remain to see what happens with that. Finally, I just want to give you some food for thought here. I mean, we're going in this direction where we're producing food more efficiently. We're talking about processed food. How do we reconcile this relationship that humans have when it comes to food and technology? Because there have been a lot of mistakes in the past, right? I think that people tend to be very skeptical of things that change or alter their experience of food. On the agriculture side, you had things like DDT and Agent Orange that didn't do great things for humans and the environment. You had things like mega processed foods that arguably the Twinkie's a modern miracle, but is it really helping us as a society? I don't know. You had things like the Melamine milk scandal, where back in 2008 in China, they started watering down milk and adding melamine because melamine is a chemical that's used in the plastic production process, and it turns out when you add it to things, it makes the protein content go up in lab tests, so they could fool lab tests into thinking it was normal milk, but actually some babies died, tens of thousands of people got sick, right? There are some externalities associated with cheap food. But you could also argue that technology brought us hundreds of varieties of heirloom tomatoes. It brought us the agricultural revolution that allowed our species to grow as much as it did already. So there are a lot of big questions here. I'm not going to answer any of those questions, but I will leave you with a couple of dad jokes. Food is tough, man. I mean, food is one of those sensitive topics like religion or politics, where people have very strong opinions. And for every industry-backed study, there's 6 other industry-backed studies. So you have the luxury of choosing the one that fits best with your worldview. And even then, I think it's a hard topic. We're all trying to figure out how to design a system that works for 9 billion people, and it's hard. It's really hard. So I ask you to be nice to each other. Consider ideas that may conflict with your own, and accept the idea that we're all probably wrong about a lot of things, like the overblown fears of clowns laughing alone with sugar. Thank you.